Welcome to our deep dive, everyone. Today we're going to be exploring virtual brain modeling.
Yeah, really exciting stuff.
It is exciting stuff. And today we're going to be looking at, how scientists are building these digital replicas. And from what I understand, our listeners are particularly interested in, how can we use this tech to understand all those really complex brain processes like epilepsy, Parkinson's,
Absolutely.
and even aging, right?
You got it. And the real exciting part is we're going to be diving into a new toolkit that just came out called Virtual Brain Inference.
VBI.
VBI, exactly. And this is really a game changer, potentially, for making virtual brain models useful in clinical settings.
So we're jumping right into the deep end here with VBI, but before we do, let's take a step back and just make sure everyone listening is on the same page. What exactly is a virtual brain?
Yeah. So, it's not like we're building these things in our garage or anything.
Not yet.
Not yet. But the idea is actually pretty straightforward. So imagine you have like a 3D roadmap of your brain's wiring, right?
Okay, I like that.
Yeah, and so we use MRI scans for this. We use a type of MRI called a T1 scan to map all the different brain regions, the different parts of the brain. And then we use another type of MRI scan called a DTI to see how all those regions connect to each other. And by putting those two pieces of information together, we can build this really, really detailed model of an individual's brain.
Okay, so we got our 3D roadmap. I'm guessing it's not just a static image, though.
Right.
How do we actually go from that picture to simulating activity in the brain?
Yeah, so that's where things get really interesting. So we use mathematical equations.
Oh, boy.
I know. But these are special equations called neural mass models. And what these equations do is they allow us to simulate the activity of neurons within each of those brain regions that we mapped out. It's like we're breathing life into that 3D roadmap.
Neural mass models. Can you just break down what that even means?
Yeah, sure. So think of it this way. If you wanted to simulate a city, you wouldn't use just one model to do that, right?
Right.
You would need different models for traffic flow, for how pedestrians are moving around, for the electrical grid, all sorts of different things.
Okay, so different models for different...
Exactly. And it's the same with the brain. We use different neural mass models depending on the type of brain activity that we're interested in simulating, and also depending on the type of data that we have available. So if we have data from an fMRI scan, we might use a different model than if we have data from an EEG, for example.
So we've built our virtual brain using MRI scans, and now it's buzzing with simulated neuronal activity thanks to these neural mass models. But how do we know if our virtual brain is actually behaving like a real brain? I mean, how do we make sure that we're not just creating a fancy digital light show here?
Yeah, that is the million-dollar question. And that gets at the heart of what's called parameter estimation. So these neural mass models that we talked about, they have all these different parameters that control things like how strongly neurons connect to each other, how excitable those neurons are, how quickly signals travel between brain regions, and things like that. Oh, okay.
And getting those parameters right is absolutely crucial for making sure that our virtual brain actually mimics a real brain accurately.
So it's like fine-tuning a musical instrument to get just the right sound.
Yeah, that's a great analogy. And that's where VBI comes in.
Okay.
So this toolkit was designed specifically to tackle this challenge of parameter estimation in a much more efficient and powerful way.
All right, color me intrigued. What makes VBI so special? What has everyone so excited about it?
Okay, well, VBI brings three key things to the table. First, it is crazy fast. Think about going from a horse-drawn carriage to a bullet train.
Oh.
In terms of how quickly we can run brain simulations now.
That's a serious speed boost. What else?
Yeah. So second, it's incredibly insightful. It can actually automatically analyze the simulated brain activity that it produces and extract all sorts of meaningful information from that. So for example, it can tell us how different brain regions are connected to each other, how they're communicating with each other, things like that. So it's not just simulating activity, it's helping us understand the patterns within that activity.
Exactly. And then the third thing is that it uses this really clever method called simulation-based inference, or SBI, to figure out what the most likely values are for all those parameters that we were talking about.
Oh, okay.
So it's basically like being a detective, right? It's like using all the clues from the observed brain data to narrow down the suspects and figure out which parameter values are the most likely culprits.
Oh, that's cool. So it sounds like VBI is a real game changer. But I know you mentioned that there are some real-world case studies where this toolkit has actually been put to the test. Let's dive into some of those, shall we?
Let's do it. So one of the studies focused on Parkinson's disease.
Okay.
And specifically, they were looking at a particular type of brainwave called beta oscillations, which are often abnormal in Parkinson's patients. And for this study, they were using a model called the Wilson-Cowan model, which is all about how these excitatory and inhibitory populations of neurons are interacting with each other in the brain.
And were they able to use VBI to actually estimate the parameters that are controlling these beta oscillations?
That's exactly right. And that's really significant because it means that we're getting closer and closer to being able to personalize treatments for Parkinson's patients.
Okay, that seems huge.
It is. Imagine being able to use VBI to predict how an individual patient's brain is going to respond to a particular medication before you even prescribe it to them.
Yeah. Okay, wow. That would be amazing.
hmm
What other case studies really stood out?
So another really cool one focused on epilepsy. And in this case, the researchers were using VBI along with a model called the epilepter model.
Okay.
And this model is really good at understanding how seizures happen in the brain.
Oh,
And what they were trying to do was use VBI to pinpoint the exact brain regions that were responsible for triggering seizures in these epilepsy patients.
oh wow.
These regions are called epileptogenic zones.
That sounds important.
Yeah, so it is. Because if we can identify those zones with really high precision, that could completely revolutionize the way that we treat epilepsy.
Right.
So, for example, surgeons could use this information to plan much more targeted surgical procedures. But it's not just about surgery, right? It could also help us to personalize other types of therapies like medication choices or even deep brain stimulation.
So we're talking about potentially changing the whole way that we diagnose and treat these conditions.
Yeah, I think that's definitely a possibility.
That's incredible. Now, VBI wasn't just used for looking at these specific disorders, right?
No, that's right. Another research team actually used VDI to investigate how the brain changes as we age.
Okay.
And for this study, they used a model called the Montbriot model, which focuses on things like how quickly neurons are firing and their membrane potentials, which is sort of a measure of how excitable they are.
So are you saying that VBI is giving us clues about how our brains age?
I think it is. So what they found was that as people get older, the communication between the two hemispheres of the brain, the left and the right, seems to decrease.
That's interesting.
And that finding could actually help to explain some of the cognitive decline that we often see as people get older.
That's really fascinating. So we're not just talking about VBI giving us insight into specific diseases, but also understanding these really fundamental processes of the brain, like aging.
Absolutely.
Now, you mentioned another study that focused on brain rhythms, and they were using MIG data for this one, right?
Yes. And for this one, they used a model called the Stewart-Landau model, which is particularly good at analyzing these oscillatory activities in the brain.
Okay, hold on. Brain rhythms. Can you remind me what those are?
Yeah, so think of it like the brain's own orchestra,
Okay.
where you have all these different instruments playing at different frequencies. So you have alpha waves, beta waves, gamma waves, all these different types of brain waves that are oscillating at different speeds. And these rhythms are really important for all sorts of cognitive functions.
Okay, so it's like VBI is helping us to understand not just the individual players in the brain's orchestra, but how all the instruments are working together to create this beautiful music, so to speak.
That's a perfect way to put it. And speaking of music, one of the most fascinating studies used the Wang model, which is based on this idea that the brain is like an attractor network.
Right.
Right. It's constantly pulling in information from the world to try to make sense of things.
Yeah.
And in this particular study, they use VBI to actually predict individual brain activity patterns. And they did this just by looking at myelin maps, which is pretty amazing.
Okay, hold on. Back up for a sec.
Yeah.
Myelin maps. Remind me what those are again.
Yeah, sure. So myelin is that fatty substance that insulates nerve fibers, right? So it basically provides us with this wiring diagram of the brain, if
Yeah.
you will.
So they're predicting how someone's brain works just based on its wiring diagram.
Exactly. And what's really cool is that they were able to do that with pretty good accuracy.
Right.
Yeah. So by combining that really detailed wiring information from the myelin maps with the dynamic power of VBI, they could predict these really unique patterns of brain activity that were specific to each individual.
That's incredible. Sounds like VBI is opening up all sorts of new possibilities for understanding the brain. But before we get too carried away, I know there was one more case study that you wanted to mention. And this one actually combined two of the models that we talked about, the Montbriot and the Wang, right? Why did they do that, and what did they find?
Yeah, so this is where we see VBI's efficiency really shining. So remember, the Montbriot model focuses on those fundamental neuronal properties, like how quickly neurons are firing and their membrane potential,
Right.
while the Wang model is all about how the brain acts like an attractor network,
Oh,
right?
yeah.
By using VBI with both of these models, they were able to not only estimate parameters accurately, but do it super quickly.
Okay, I am all about efficiency, especially when we're talking about these really complex brain simulations. What kind of speed are we talking about here?
Well, for the Montbriot model, they found that VBI could get a really accurate estimate of this thing called the global coupling parameter,
Okay.
which basically tells us how strongly different brain regions are connected to each other. And they could get a good estimate of that parameter with just 100 simulations.
Oh, wow. So less is more in this case. Fewer simulations, but really accurate results. That's pretty impressive.
Yeah, it is. And for both the Montbriot and the Wang models, VBI did a fantastic job of predicting what we called functional connectivity,
Okay.
which basically means it could accurately map out how different brain regions are talking to each other.
So it's like VBI is giving us this backstage pass to see all the communication that's happening between different parts of the brain. This toolkit really seems like it's a game changer for brain research.
Yeah, it's truly groundbreaking. And the fact that VBI is open source,
Oh, I like that.
meaning any researcher around the world can use it, can contribute to its development.
Awesome.
That just makes its potential even more powerful, right? It's like this global collaboration to try to unlock the secrets of the brain.
I love that. Open source brain science. It feels like we're really entering a whole new era in neuroscience.
Yeah.
So, to our listener, what stands out to you the most from all of this? What excites you? It really is mind-blowing, all the potential here, especially for personalized medicine. Like, imagine a world where doctors can use these virtual brain models to actually tailor treatments to their individual patients.
Yeah, it's an incredibly powerful vision, and I think VBI is helping to move us in that direction. But as with any really groundbreaking technology, I think it's important to, temper our enthusiasm with a little bit of realism.
So we shouldn't expect virtual brains to solve all of neuroscience's mysteries overnight.
Exactly, exactly. Virtual brain models are, no matter how sophisticated they become, they're still just models, right?
Mhm.
They give us incredible insights. They can guide our research in really powerful ways, but they can't perfectly replicate all the complexity of a living, breathing brain.
That's a good point. Yeah, it is easy to get caught up in the hype, but we need to remember these are tools, not, crystal balls.
Exactly. And that means that, we need to constantly be refining these models, improving them, testing them really rigorously against real world data, and just always being open to new discoveries and new challenges. That's the beauty of science, right? It's this ongoing process of discovery and refinement.
It sounds like just like VBI itself,
Hmm.
our thinking about this technology also needs to be open source, right?
Right.
We need to constantly be evolving, improving through collaboration, shared knowledge.
I think that's exactly right. I think that's how we're going to unlock the true potential of this whole field of virtual brain modeling. So, open collaboration, diverse perspectives, ongoing dialogue, all of those things are really essential for making sure that we're moving forward in a responsible and ethical way.
Absolutely. Well, this deep dive has been a real eye-opener. We've learned how these virtual brain models are actually built. We've seen how VBI is really revolutionizing the way that we study them. And we've even touched on some of the broader implications of this technology. And it's clear that virtual brain modeling has this incredible potential to really transform our understanding of the brain. And hopefully, it'll lead to some amazing breakthroughs in how we diagnose and treat neurological disorders.
I couldn't agree more. I think we're really just scratching the surface of what's possible here.
And to our listener, as we wrap up our exploration of virtual brain modeling, we'll leave you with this. Imagine a world where these models are commonplace, where they're used not just for research, but for personalized medicine, for education, even for things like entertainment.
Yeah.
What would that world look like? What opportunities would it bring? What new questions would we need to ask? The future of brain science is really unfolding before our eyes, and it's up to all of us to shape it responsibly and ethically.